What do you know about politics? What should you know? Forget views, beliefs, and opinions. Politics is really a science, and that's where we come in. Welcome to Inside Political Science. I'm Kirby Goodell.
I'm Todd Kent, and we're your guides to what's actually happening in politics. We're using our years of experience to navigate political data, media, money, behavior, and more to educate and inform you.
Welcome to Inside Political Science. I'm Kirby Goodell. I'm here with my good friend Todd Kent, and the students are back. Todd, I love the first part of the fall. I know we're not supposed to. We've had the summer where it's been more quiet. There's less traffic, but I love when the students are back, and I love when football season starts again.
There's a new energy on campus, that's for sure. The question I have for you is there going to be a new energy in politics now that the summer's over? Because, in the summer, a lot of times we don't get on the news. We don't read the paper. We don't do things. We're on vacation. The kids are out of school. And maybe things happen and we don't really think about it.
Yeah, weirdly, once upon a time, and we remember these days where there was a heavy political season in which campaigns were run. And then after there was a winter, we went into a governing period and we thought a lot less about politics. People like you and I thought about it, but your average American could just go about their lives. And over the last 10 years, 15 years, maybe we go back 20, increasingly politics is day to day, and we're paying so much attention to it all the time. At least the political junkies of us are, but everyone gets a summer break.
Yeah, it's that 24/7 political cycle now because I think we have 24/7 social media. I was thinking back to a campaign that I worked on when I was a political consultant where our opponent came out and said that he just didn't feel like you should spend any money over the summer because people didn't really focus on the fall elections until after the World Series were over. So we just ran low-level kind of attack ads all summer. By the time September hit, he was down 25 points. So maybe it's a good strategy. I don't know.
Well, and related to that, so Donald Trump disappears for a couple of days, and the internet does what the social media does, and all of a sudden people are wondering, is he ill? Is he able to perform his duties as president? Has he died? Lots of crazy rumors circulating.
Yeah, I saw today where he's addressing those things, but he looked very strong in carrying out a press conference. I think that's where we are, and I think maybe President Trump is he's kind of created his own situation because he's so visible that if he's gone for a day or so and you're not hearing any direct quotes, then who knows what happened, because it's never been that way. And so we've gone almost 9 months with just every day you see a lot of Donald Trump.
Yeah, you could go a couple of days without maybe hearing something from Joe Biden. It feels like you can't go 30 minutes without hearing something from Donald Trump, without a post on social media or something. So when he did sort of disappear and people weren't hearing from him, lots of people were wondering, is something going on? Is there something up? Which does sort of raise an interesting question about what happens to presidents when if they are incapacitated or if they do pass away. And we have a government that's set up for that, right?
Right. I think it was after the assassination of John F. Kennedy where they realized we need the Congress realized we needed to get things in order. And what happens when you have a president that can't be president anymore, whether it be through an accident or injury or sickness or something that keeps them from being able to carry out their duties.
Yeah, and the 25th Amendment allows for, if there is a real concern about a president's health, then the vice president, along with the cabinet and a majority vote of the cabinet, can actually step in and replace the president and call for a vote. The president can push back if they believe the vote is incorrect. But we do have a mechanism for that, but it's a little tricky to deal with because I don't think any administration ever wants to admit that the person in the White House isn't up to the job.
Exactly. I think that's I think it would have to be very visible and very public if something was to happen. The 25th Amendment has never been exercised, and so I think and thankfully so. When we want the elected person to be able to carry out their duties, So it remains to be seen how that will take place. I would think if it's a private or something that's not a public illness or public something happening, it's harder because the president's people can say no, it's not happening, everything's fine. So I think going forward, if it was very public, that would be different.
Yeah, I think the incentive is very strong. It works very strongly against doing anything and acting in that situation because, one, the vice president might be accused of disloyalty. The cabinet might be accused of disloyalty, or at least the ones who voted for it. I think if the political forces, political people are looking at it and they're going, don't do this. This is bad for the party. This is bad for the president. This is bad for the administration. So even if the situation did call for it, and this situation did not call for it, I want to be very clear about that. The politics of it make it very difficult. And sometimes people wonder within the American political system, we have regularly scheduled elections, and that's the way we sort of deal with our politics. We have nothing similar to a parliamentary system where they have a no confidence vote or they have some other way to get rid of a president. And if you want to get rid of the leader in our political system, either they have to have committed crimes and you can impeach them and have them removed, or you have to say that they are no longer capable of performing the job.
Right. And if in that situation, what's interesting about our system is we have regularly scheduled elections every 2 years. And so even if say that you have no confidence in the president, you can actually, through the elective process, reduce his or her power through the election process. And so that, I think that in some ways, even though we can't call a snap election like you would see in a parliamentary system, there is right around the corner another election that gives a kind of a referendum on the current president.
Yeah. Well, talking about a referendum on the current president, he is alive. How's he doing?
Interesting. I actually did some looking at polls today to kind of see, here we are 9 months into this presidency. His job approval is at 47, which is actually fairly high for President Trump. Mm-hmm. And then it maintains over the summer kind of that around 47, and which is show a little bit of stability. Doing really well when it comes to fighting crime, getting rid or removing people from the country, illegal immigrants who have committed crimes. He gets high marks for that. Not so good when it comes to the economy. The cost of things, the inflation, and the general economy is down a little bit, and then also the reaction of the public on tariffs. So there's some good and there's some bad out there for the president.
Yeah, one of the things that I think, if you're thinking about the politics and the way that Trump has positioned himself during this early part of his second term, a lot of people will say, oh, he shouldn't be able to go in and take over D.C. But what it does is it allows him to very strongly position himself as the anti-crime president. And then when you push back on that, if you're the Democratic Party pushing back on that, it seems like are you pro-crime? And so it does put the Democratic Party in a difficult position because there is a fair argument to be made about whether the president should do this. It's easier to make the case in D.C. than if he were to extend and try to do something in Chicago or San Francisco. But it still puts the Democrats in an awkward political position. And I think Trump likes to defy norms. He likes to extend his authority. He likes to find these test cases where he can exercise power. But he also likes to do it when it kind of makes the opposition seem on the wrong side of an issue, right?
It does. Crime is really one of those bipartisan issues. Nobody really wants crime in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for somebody like you said to say, okay, we're good with crime, so stay away. And if he can be successful, it's hard for people to say they're not applaud that activity, especially in some of your larger cities where the crime rates are very high. And I think that's the same way with immigration or the removal of immigrants who have committed illegal immigrants who have committed a crime. It's hard to argue with that. Mm-hmm. So those are easy kind of wins for the president, and it also sets him up against the opposition for them having to say, we don't like this.
Yeah.
But and also, in some ways, it takes kind of the voters' minds off of other things that they don't like.
Yeah.
And it's when we look back at why Donald Trump was elected in the first place. I'm convinced by looking at the retrospectives through polling and other things that people were said we need to fix the economy. We need to deal with inflation. We need to have growth and jobs and these type of things. And so we think that Donald Trump's the guy that can do that. So like I like to say, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Well, the main thing in the voter's mind is inflation and the economy.
Well, and Donald Trump now finds himself in kind of a funny place because he's kind of in Biden land. and let me explain that. The economy under Biden, by objective indicators, wasn't terrible, right? It was the unemployment rate was relatively low. The inflation rate, it had been a problem earlier, but it was coming down some, and Trump, it's come down even further. But voters didn't feel good about where the economy was, and so we had this distinction between vibecession and recession that people were talking about. And it seems like people still aren't very comfortable. They're not feeling like they're okay. And there was a Wall Street Journal poll where they talked about this. Americans don't believe the American dream is real. Some of them believe it was never real. They feel like they're working harder and not getting ahead. And there's a lot of economic anxiety out there, even among people who objectively are making a pretty good living.
Yeah. I think as you look around, I felt like during the Biden administration, because the people were having difficulty getting mortgages, and the interest rates were high, to buy a house, and maybe having to live an extra 6 months or a year in their parents' basement or something. That kind of causes negative view of the economy, and I think a lot of that is what we're seeing where. It's those little things as you look out there and say, the American dream is to buy a home, to be able to live on your own, to have some property, have a job that you can pay for it. And those are the things. If people can't do that, what they're going to do is they're going to be very negative about the future.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. A lot of that poll also points out some of the issues in terms of in terms of housing. People don't feel like they can buy a house. They don't feel, and they also just don't feel this general sense of economic comfort, of security, like they've made it, even though they're maybe older and they're, in one case, one of the people quoted in the story was making over $300,000 a year, but they felt like they were struggling month to month and they couldn't get ahead and they weren't able to have the bigger house for their family or whatever else they were looking for. And it's kind of it's a different place. You almost wonder, is this beyond the reach of politics right now? Is there something structural in the economy that's going to be hard for any president or any Congress to fix?
That narrative out there. I've been reading articles about, is AI going to steal the entry-level jobs?
Yeah.
Well, all of a sudden, you have a whole batch of graduates who become, kind of negative about the economy, about their future, about their future opportunities. These types of things that are really in some ways beyond politics.
Yeah.
It's a new development in our world over the last couple of years, but it's a lot of times. The hardest thing for a president or a new administration to do is to fix the economy. One, there's a lag time. It just takes it. So whether you're a Democrat or Republican, and the efforts you put into it, they take a long time. Mm-hmm. And the problem is we live in a short cycle right now.
And you mentioned tariffs. I think a lot of economists would acknowledge that they don't think the tariffs have hit quite as strong in terms of the inflationary pressures that they thought they might. But I think a lot of people are also warning we're at sort of a precipice where the tariffs are going to start exerting more and more inflationary pressure, and we're going to see prices going up, and we're beginning to go into the 2026 midterm cycle. So Republicans have to be worried about that, right?
I think so too. I think there's some goodwill given to a new president over time, and I think they're going to be looking for, look, if you can't fix the economy, we have to find somebody that can. And so I think that's that's the number one issue. And if I was the president's advisor, I'd say we've got to start talking about it. We've got to start thinking about it and start, telling them and give a narrative that actually gets people hopeful again.
Yeah, and we talked about redistricting, and I don't think we need to go back into that, but with the midterms right around the corner, if you don't deal with the price issue, you're looking at probably Republicans taking a big hit in terms of the midterm election cycles. I saw an estimate earlier today that suggested that if Texas is the only state to redistrict, Democrats have to run about 2 points stronger than Republicans nationwide in order to win control of the House. Right now, they're polling at about 4%. That's within a margin of error, but you do expect that if conditions are bad, that's a good signal for a potential Democratic wave. Redistricting isn't going to save Republicans from a wave election and a bad economy.
No, I agree with that. In fact, I was showing my class the other day the numbers that looked at you looked at the first election after a new president comes in, and then the gain or loss in House seats, and with looking at when a president with a 45 to 47 approval level loses an average of 30 to 40 seats.
Yeah.
Now I think that may be high, but that's historically. If you look back historically, that's what's happened. I think right now it's it changes everything if the Republicans lose the House.
Yeah,
their ability to govern and Trump to be able to accomplish the things he's got his sights set on. So these are very perilous times for the president.
And Trump has always been very good about controlling and maintaining his approval numbers among his base, less so about gaining new supporters. But that means that his approval numbers probably aren't going to be strong enough to pull him over with a weak economy. So we'll come back to this idea and talk a little bit about Republicans in the business community after this break.
I'm Chris Boyd, host of Think. Each day we strive to expand your worldview by talking about discoveries in science and health, about new ways of considering the past and present, and about the issues that divide us and occasionally bring us together. Plus, we always save space to hear the deeply personal stories that remind us that each of our experiences is unique. I hope you'll join us next time as we take a moment to think.
Weekdays at 1 on KAMU FM.
Did you know KAMU Studios offers 13 original shows? All of these locally hosted productions are featured on our local shows, series, and podcast webpage. Topics cover Texas A&M, art, politics, music, books, gardening, community issues, and more. Find what interests you on our website. Then listen on your favorite podcast platform. Go to tx.ag/KAMU FM shows and start listening today.
We're back. Todd, we were talking a little bit about the president's approval numbers, and one of the things that I think is just remarkable, and you were looking at some poll numbers, and I was looking at some poll numbers, and this is a sign of the times. This is just it's not just a factor of Trump, but it really is shocking when you look at it in a graphical display that 93% of, according to the Gallup opinion polls, 93% of Republicans approve of Trump. Only 1% of Democrats approve of Trump. Our politics are just so absolutely polarized, and it wasn't always this way, but this is the world we live in now.
It really is. It's interesting. I was thinking back today where you go back 20 years and the presidencies and even beyond that, where if the president was trying to help pass a piece of legislation, he would call in members of the other party to come and have lunch with him, dinner at the White House, wine and dine them to try to twist some arms. But you don't even see that anymore. Yeah. There's not even any discussion. And I think we've just become so polarized. And what interesting enough is we've talked about earlier on this show in previous episodes where it's parties punish their own party for even talking to the opposition.
Yeah.
And that not only continues the polarization, but it makes it even worse.
It also makes, and you see this with members. Members will sometimes acknowledge this, especially former members. But I think we're also seeing some of this as members of the Senate are deciding to come back to their state to run for governor. It's not as much fun to be in Congress as it once was. Maybe someone out there listening is going, it shouldn't be fun. It should be work. You should be fighting for your side. But it doesn't seem like the members really enjoy it the way they once did.
It looks that way. You see a lot. We're seeing a lot of retirements. And a lot of times you see retirements among the opposition party, the party that's out of power. But we're also seeing retirements from the Republicans right now, where it's just, I guess, governing and as a member of the House and the Senate just doesn't seem to be something you want to continue for the long periods of time anymore. Now, we're not seeing mass exodus out of the Congress, but we're still seeing people that's surprising to see these people leaving. And I think you alluded to it, that maybe it's I can turn into my sights on being a governor, where I can get up every morning and make a difference where I am. You're intricately involved in the legislation and what goes on, and you can run something. And the governor is not a bad path to the White House if that's your ultimate goal.
Yeah, and there have been some stories here and there about, one of the things that party leaders do is they either help recruit candidates or they try to keep candidates from running for something else. And some of the stories that you've heard is some of the Trump team getting on the phone to try to keep members in the House or to keep members in the Senate because they don't want those seats to be potential pickups for the other side. And that in itself is interesting. But as you mentioned, on the Senate side especially, watching people come back to be governor, once upon a time being a senator was such a it was typically governor to senator and then trying to be president, and you needed the Senate term in order to prove that you knew something about foreign policy, or at least it was mixed about what was the better path. And now it seems like a lot of people in the Senate are like, yeah, I'd rather go back and be governor where I have some control over policy.
No, I think that's true, and I would expect us to see more of that as we come on.
Yep.
And we're going to see really in the next short term how good the bench is for the Republicans and the Democrats. Who can they these now open seats? Who can they get to run for these? Because really, we know in politics, name identification is critical, and getting a candidate up there that somebody knows helps you win an election, and in which party can start filling some of these open seats with candidates that are going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, the recruiting battle's really important, especially in midterm election cycles. Making sure you have a candidate in a race, even if it doesn't look winnable, making sure that they have some money, making sure that they campaign. That's the only way, we sometimes talk about wave elections. That's the only way a wave happens, is making sure that you have people in place and they have resources to make the national campaign local.
Yeah, and I think we're going to start seeing that happen really quick. It almost reminds me of, I hate to make this analogy, of NIL in college football. You know what I mean? Where it's this, getting in the portal and changing jobs and going where there's, probably they've talked to somebody and say, look, will you support me? And they have some promises for money, because really it's all about name identification and finances. How much money can you raise? And that's why somebody leaving the House or the Senate to run for governor, it makes them viable almost from day one if they have a history of being able to raise money.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things that has really caught my attention over the last couple of weeks is, and the Wall Street Journal has had an editorial on this where it's talking about state capitalism. Also, Rand Paul and the talk show, the senator from Kentucky, the libertarian senator from Kentucky, Eric Erickson, the conservative talk show host, have expressed real concern about the fact that the government, the federal government, is now in the business of owning business. I always look because Trump fascinates me because of his ability to define norms and his ability to create what look like are going to be fault lines and then somehow to navigate them. This looks like a potential fault line going forward within the Republican Party. Do you think is he going to get over this one too?
I don't know. I think back to my earliest not involvement, but kind of monitoring of politics, and Margaret Thatcher in Great Britain was trying to get rid of state-owned and selling them off to the private sector. We almost have a reverse going on here. I was very surprised, and we haven't heard other than kind of this kind of cautious, discussion of that issue when the U.S. government took a stake in Intel.
Yeah,
that became, I think now it's kind of taking it to the next level.
Yeah, and once upon a time, I mean, and I know this, you begin to sound like I begin to sound like an old man when I give my once upon a time stories. But once upon a time, the Republican Party was clearly ideologically aligned with business. They wanted low taxes, they wanted less regulation, they wanted less government intervention, and that's sort of been the tradition of the Republican Party. The Democratic Party was on the other side, more the party of labor. Democrats are losing labor, and Republicans, this relationship seems at best strained. Increasingly, Donald Trump doesn't seem to be ideologically committed to the idea of low taxes and less regulation. He seems very transactional in the approach. What can you give me as a business? What can you help me with? And so when these businesses are meeting with him, sometimes he says, I want to share.
Yeah, and if you listen to their own defense of that and say, look, we've given these businesses lots of money in the past, with different things. Maybe we should get something back, which I think is a poor defense. But here's my thing: I wonder if this new Republican Party that Trump is kind of the leader of, is it really like the old business-oriented Republican Party? It's much more wage, daily wage earners, and there's it's a different mix. Doesn't mean there's still not business people involved, but it's certainly as a kind of a percentage that's gone down. So I wonder if it really even matters to his base anymore, other than the few people who are willing to speak out.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can talk about with Trump, and there's with the political science literature, there's some controversy over whether there is such a thing as a political realignment, because the way it was originally conceptualized is it was this one really big election and then everything changed. And then the more scholars looked into it, they found, there's a lot of change before and then there's a lot of change after, and it's hard to pinpoint a single critical election. But having said that, it really looks like Trump has realigned the political system, and this relationship with business is one of those factors. His coalition is less educated. The Democratic coalition now is more educated, more college educated. On issues, he's now made the Republican Party a pro-tariff party. That was not the party of Ronald Reagan, and this business relationship is now frayed, strained. They're not going to go running to the Democrats because the Democrats still have, the Bernie Sanders and the Mamdamis and the AOCs of the world. The progressive left is not going to make them an easy alliance with business. But you look at politics and you say, we can, I think, draw a line between 2016 and going forward and say, this is a new era of politics, and a lot of this is because of Donald Trump.
I think that's true. I think the one thing that he has going for him is there's still a perception that the Republican Party is the party of lower taxes.
I think that is
right. So
yes,
that's going to keep the business kind of on his side, and also this idea that we're not going to tax business. In fact, we're going to reduce it if we have to. So I think that helps them kind of maintain that with the average voter that I don't want to pay any more taxes, so this is the party of less taxes. And when I looked at the polls today, and there seems to be within the numbers this idea that cutting waste is still popular, and it even transcends party. That we don't want government spending a lot of money. And so I think this goes back to along the fringes, there's certain issues that really support the president in that, even though he's talking about, he's not using these words, state capitalism or the government owning a stake in a private business. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's fraught with future problems as new businesses, spring up and say, "Hey, I'm competing against the federal government," and that becomes a problem, an issue that they'll have to deal with.
Yeah, part of the concern among some of the folks on the right in terms of some of these moves is this fear that what makes the U.S. economy really dynamic is that you do have less government involvement, less government intervention, and so competitors can come and challenge long-established businesses. And if they're successful, then they can replace them. And in the theory of capitalism, there's the idea of creative destruction, right? That companies that no longer serve their purpose. And the question is, if government gets involved on the business side, do we lose that dynamic part of our economy, the part of our economy that really allows it to grow because this is a place where innovation happens? On the flip side of that, though, we do live in a world where we're often competing in world global markets against businesses from other countries that are supported by their governments or are partly owned by their governments. So if you want to compete in that economy, what do you do?
That's an interesting observation you made, that how a lot of, take China, for example. We know that their labor laws are different. We know that there's a lot of subsidies going on. And so they're able to maybe produce the same good at a much cheaper rate mm-hmm. than we can in this country. And so I think there's a reordering with globalism. If it really reordered the world economy and such that now it's no longer what somebody in the state next to you is doing. It's really what matters is what other countries are doing, and that becomes a political issue. So I think a lot of what we see in politics today is we're seeing it started a long time ago, mm-hmm. and we're seeing the kind of come to fruition in modern days that it didn't, just like you said, it didn't happen one election ago. This trend has been going on for a long time.
Yeah, political change is always happening, and then sometimes you notice it in these bigger bursts. And with Donald Trump, I think one of the things that you can say is that he has been very good at sort of sensing where the trends are going, or where the possibilities are. On immigration before Trump, you began to see the split between Democrats and Republicans. He emphasized a very anti-immigration proposal and got the base of the Republican Party. On tariffs, a lot of people out there, I know economists don't like tariffs, but when we look at the public opinion polls, a lot of the public says, why aren't we putting a cost on their goods so that we make goods here cheaper, so that people buy American goods, and they don't they don't buy the logic of the economist, right?
Yeah. No, that's true. You're able to tell a story now that you couldn't do years ago, and it's kind of new, and people are saying, yeah, and I think this kind of new kind of base within the Republican Party, they want, use the word America first. They want to create a context that favors the American worker.
Yep. And this includes corporations, right? They want the corporations to also. So I think if you go and you talk to Trump's base and you say he's got a deal where now the U.S. government owns part of Intel and they're revenue sharing with NVIDIA, one of the world's largest chip makers, the world's largest chip maker, the world's most valuable company, they say, well, good. That's what they should do. We should get something back as Americans. And interesting, if he's getting some criticism from some of the conservative voices, especially the libertarian conservative voices like Ron Paul, he's also getting some praise from unlikely sources like Bernie Sanders, who, that sounds like a great idea.
That's what I've been working for, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like socialism to me. And I don't think it's socialism. I think it's a version of state capitalism, but I think the important thing for our listeners is he has moved into uncharted territory again. and he continues to do this, and he continues to move parts of the American culture, political culture, and the political system and the government along with him.
You know, if Donald Trump has a genius, and that's it, it's his ability to kind of look ahead to see where he can go. That it's going to. His political opponents are never ready for the next move. It seems like.
Yes.
What I'm looking at as we look over, we started after the Obama administration, we turned over to the Trump administration in 2016, and then we had Trump, the Biden administration, or Trump leaving office and back in office. What happens 3 years from now? That's to me, that's very interesting, because you kind of look for one party to be able to kind of solidify something.
Yeah.
But we've been in such transition, and it's so. If you look at the numbers, we're seeing they're so close. One way or another, are you going to see that? Are you going to see the parties being able to kind of solidify political control?
Yeah, but just because we're talking about some of the transformations that Trump has made on the political system, that doesn't mean we're endorsing them. It also doesn't mean that they're permanent, right? I mean, you can begin to see some of the with each of these major movements. When we see major movements in American political history, you can see the seeds where the change is going to start falling apart. Is it the division between sort of the libertarian conservative movement versus the MAGA conservative movement? What's the politics going to look like going forward? Because we're in a two-party system, we don't really capture the division very well, and those divisions are always changing and shifting slightly. But what we can say under Trump is the party coalitions are very different, and the issues dividing the parties are very different. This is not the party of Ronald Reagan.
No, it's not. In fact, if you think back to the 1980 and 84 elections, Ronald Reagan was kind of ran an anti-government type thing. Government's too big. It's wasting our money. It's the government's the problem. But it was still 14 years later before the Republicans took control of the House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years. So there's a long kind of transition to get there. Yeah. And so that's why I question whether or not what we're seeing now is this signal something we're going to be there for a while, or is it just still more in flux and we're going to see more confusion?
Yeah. And a lot of it will also depend on how the Democrats respond. And one of the things that I think Trump has been pretty good about, if you want to give him credit for this, when he moves, Democrats feel it necessary to react. And I mentioned the Bernie Sanders sort of saying this seemed like not such a bad thing. Oftentimes, if Trump says yes, Democrats say no, even if it was something they liked before. And so he positions himself in a way that it not only moves the Republican Party, it also moves the Democratic Party.
That's so true. But they're reacting to him.
Yes, he's the driver.
Yeah, what we're not seeing is the reaction being new ideas, and so this raises an interesting question: are we going to see we've had several mayors kind of come out with kind of a pro-socialist type agenda. Is that going to be their reaction? Where our new idea is basically socialism in the cities, and so I think the Democrats need to come to think about what's the new Democrat Party going to look like, and what are the ideas going to be on it. And I think that there's a little bit of confusion there too about which way we go. I think you're going to have mayors of some major cities going direction. Is that the direction that the party wants to go?
And I think that's the $10 million question right there, because the Democratic Party is divided between a center that wants to occupy the center and say the Republicans are now out on the right-wing populist side of the aisle, and then there's also a progressive left that says, no, we need to be progressive like them, but we need to be out on the ideological extreme. We'll talk about that maybe in the next episode. That's it for episode 31. Thank you so much for listening. If this is your first time listening, click the subscribe button so you never miss an episode, and thank you for joining us.
Inside Political Science is a production from KAMU, Aggieland's Public Television and Radio. For more information, visit tx.ag/insidepoliticalscience. Have a question for our experts? Email them at insidepolicy@tamu.edu. Also, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss a new episode.